The genealogies throughout Genesis remind us of the main character, God, and the one who will crush the head of the serpent. Genealogies are important throughout Genesis, throughout the whole Bible, but it always highlights the messianic seed line. There's the seed of the serpent, is the first genealogy given, Cain, and the seed of the woman who will crush the head of the serpent is given second, and that is Adam through Seth. And each of the genealogies after that, there are always at least two. There is the serpent seed line and the woman's seed line. And hers is always the messianic seed line. And it always begins with, these are the generations of. Now, the serpent seed line doesn't start like that, but the woman's seed line does. So watch for that, because the seed line of the woman will also be carried on in the book of Matthew, who goes back to Abraham and follows that messianic seed line. And then in the book of Luke, who goes back to Adam and follows the messianic seed line. These are the generations of, and it's followed by 10 names. Remember, Adam through Noah, then Noah through Terah, then Terah through, we have to wait a while to get to his name, Isaac. Only one other place outside of Genesis has the words, these are the generations of, followed by 10 names. And that is in the book of Ruth. I'm going to have you open up to the book of Ruth, because the names are given after these are the generations of. So let's go to the book of Ruth, which is right after Joshua, and then the book of then Judges. I think it's Judges. And the book of, no. Yes, right after the book of Judges comes Ruth. Go to the 4th chapter and the last 2 verses, and look. It says, now these are the generations of. He's hooking us up to Genesis, isn't he? And the first one in line is Perez. Well, many of you don't know the name Perez, but remember Judah and Tamar have twins. The story of Judah finding who was supposed to give his 3rd son after the first 2 sons had died. He was to give the 3rd son to Tamar as a kinsman redeemer, and he never does. So Tamar hoodwinks him and acts like a prostitute, and he has Perez and a twin, and it is Perez that is chosen to be in the messianic seed line. Not, I forget, get the name of the other one right this minute. But anyway, from that line comes Perez, and so watch what it says. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. These are the same words that are used in Genesis. Fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Ooh, that's what the story of Ruth is about. Her kinsman redeemer, Boaz, fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. This is the climax of the whole book. And notice how many names were there. It's on your sheet of paper. 10. And guess who's the 10th one? as always, the most important one, and that is David. He's a 10, just like Isaac was a 10, just like Ham was a 10, and Terah was a 10. This is the climactic moment of the whole book. This is why the book was written, for this climactic moment, to show that Ruth, she was the true Israelite and could be a part of the Messianic seed line through Boaz. Right. There are two huge problems in the story of Ruth, which is why the story was written, because of these problems. Number one, she's a Moabite. Number two, she's the great-grandmother of David, which could disqualify him from being a king because she's married. His line has a Moabite woman. But the author's purpose in telling the story about Ruth is to show that Ruth is a true Israelite despite her ancestry. Now, I gave you a second attachment, and that's the one I want you to bring out now, because we're going to take those two problems and answer them. What is it? Well, there are the first problem is that she's a Moabite. Now, I'm going to read to you about the Moabites and what is said in Deuteronomy about them, but you can go to it, Deuteronomy 23:3. And it says, no Ammonite or Moabite. The Ammonites and Moabites became the enemies of Israel going through the wilderness, and they were the children of Lot, Abraham's nephew. And it says, no Ammonite nor Moabite may enter the assembly of Yahweh, even to the 10th generation. None of them may enter the assembly of Yahweh forever. Well, Ruth is a Moabite, and she's disregarded. We would say she's disregarded. And in fact, if she's not able to come into the assembly of Yahweh, then David shouldn't have her as a great-grandmother. And that's the second problem. She is the great-grandmother of David, which could disqualify him from being king. But the author's purpose in telling this story about Ruth is to show that Ruth is a true Israelite, despite her ancestry. To demonstrate how Ruth is a true Israelite and to link Ruth to Abraham's descendants' seed, the author echoes the stories in Genesis. He echoes them in Ruth. So what happened in Genesis happens in Ruth, and so he links Ruth back to those of the Israelite line in Genesis. So let me show you how he does that. The first thing is, if you remember, Ruth was married to an Israelite. Remember, Naomi had 2 sons, and Ruth was married to one of the sons, and they're in the Moabite land. But the son dies, and Ruth does not have seed from him. She does not have a child. She is barren, just as Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel were in Genesis. She leaves her country and her family just as Abraham had. She says to Naomi, your people will be my people, your God, my God. identifying herself with the Israelites. Yahweh gives her conception, just as he did with Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel. In fact, it says that in Ruth 4:13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. She was barren. The Lord gave her conception. She had a son. At the very end of the book, there's a genealogy, which starts with, these are the generations of. This genealogy in Ruth really links it back to Genesis, in which we find genealogies starting out that way. Not only that, but we know from Genesis that this genealogy is messianic. And Ruth is too, because it ends up with David, who's the great, and so on, grandfather of Jesus. He's in that line. It's a messianic seed line. And and then there are 10 names, aren't there? Just like in Genesis, in the messianic seed line, 10 names. Perah is the first one listed, and he is Judah's son. Remember, Adam, then Noah, 10 names between them. Then Terah, 10 names between Noah and Terah. Then Terah has Abraham. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has Judah. And Judah has Perez. So it begins with Perez. Thus, Ruth mirrors the women and men and stories that are held in Genesis. She's a true Israelite who is worthy to be part of God's people. So, David can then say, doesn't matter that she's a Moabite. She has become a true Israelite. And we have our Hebrews, our Hebrews 11. Now we have something first in verse 13 after Abraham and Sarah are mentioned. Last week we did Sarah, the week before we did Abraham, and now we have a summary statement. These all died in faith. Who's he talking about? Well, remember his first story is about Abel. Second is about Enoch. Third story is about Noah. Fourth is the story of Abraham. Fifth is the story of Sarah. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised. Promised? What promise? Land, seed, blessing. But having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they are strangers and exiles on the earth. Christians need to see themselves as strangers and exiles on the earth, because we have a heavenly city. And so we don't need to worry about anything that goes on. No matter what happens, we have a heavenly city. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone, in other words, they had started out in they had been thinking of the land which they had gone out, they would have had an opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country. That is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them and us in faith, those of us who, by faith, have come into his family. He has prepared for them and us a city. Okay, so the next one is about Abraham again. So we have a lot about Abraham. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises, land, seed, blessing, was in the act of offering up his only son. Now remember, land, seed, blessing. He had received the promise of seed. And now he has to offer up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your seed be named. God had promised him the seed line is going to continue through Isaac. And now God is saying to him, kill him, sacrifice him. Now, I don't know what you think about sacrifices, but the fact that they're in the past makes it easier for us because we can know that we don't have to sacrifice our children, and God's not going to expect it of us because we know this story. But in Abraham's day, it was the norm for people to offer up their children as sacrifices. So I'm sure this was not a shock to Abraham. He was grieved, I'm sure, but the shock was not that he had to offer up a son to God, because all the other gods had required it. But look at this. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. At that early stage, he had come to the conclusion that if God had said through Isaac, will my seed be named, and God is telling me to sacrifice him, the only thing that I can think of, says Abraham, that God's going to raise him from the dead. That was a good conclusion because it was true. From which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. It was like he was just ready to do it. He was willing just at that time, that moment, to use his knife and offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And he received them back as though from the dead, figuratively speaking. I'll read the whole paragraph. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. That's next week. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. That's next week. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. Next week, we're going to talk about Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph and their faith. But let's go again to by faith about Abraham at the bottom there. When he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promise, land, seed, and blessing, was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your seed be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Now, we have only one problem. When you go back to that story, it never tells us, point blank, that Abraham believed that Isaac would be raised from the dead. So how did the writer of Hebrews come to that conclusion? Well, he read very carefully the story. And that's how I want you to figure out how Abraham figured out that Isaac could be raised from the dead. So when you see it, I hope you see I'm going to come to the end of the page, and it's in those words that we're looking at that lets us know that Abraham believed in the resurrection. Let's see if you get it. Oh, also, I want you to circle any word that has to do with seeing. Abraham was able to make a covenant of peace with, this is the story before, I'm putting it in context. The story before, there was a covenant of peace between his enemy Abimelech and himself. He then plants a tamarisk tree and calls on the name of Yahweh, the everlasting God. That's a name for God, the everlasting God. After these things, God tested Abraham and spoke to him. So a mountain high experience. All the problems with Abimelech are resolved. God took care of it all. And now he's told, okay, Abraham. But God was testing him. The thing is, Abraham didn't know it was test. Abraham thought it was the real thing. Abraham, God says, here I am, says Abraham. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Now, what you don't know, unless you're reading what I put in brackets what Moriah means. It's the place of seeing. And offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. And the narrator says, so Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham spoke to his young men. Abraham says, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there, and we will worship, and we will come again to you. Narrator. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac spoke to his father Abraham, my father. Here I am, my son. Isaac says, behold, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham says, God will see. I'll stop a minute. We have it, God, Yahweh, Jireh. So you know Jehovah Jireh. It can be translated God provides. But the word in Hebrew is God sees. But in this context, the word see can be translated God will provide, or God will see to it. So we have the word see there. God will see, or God will provide, or Yahweh, Jehovah Jireh, for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. God will see to it. Did you see where Abraham demonstrates that he believes in the resurrection? Well, whenever Abraham speaks a second time in the middle, watch what he says. Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there, and we will worship, and we will come again to you. How could that be if he's going to sacrifice his son? The only way we will come again to you is if there's a resurrection, because Abraham knew God had told him to sacrifice his son. So Abraham demonstrated his faith, his belief in the resurrection by saying, we will come again to you. Now notice, when Abraham said this, just above in the narrator section in verse 4, it says, on the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place. Third day. He believed in the resurrection on the third day. And the resurrection occurred on the third day. And we have a lot of third day occurrences in the Old Testament because great things always happen on the third day, as though preparing us for the third day resurrection. And in fact, in the Gospels, we have loads of things happening in threes or on the third day, so that we are prepared for a third day resurrection. Let's go on. The narrator says, so they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order to bound Isaac, his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. He's ready. Then Abraham reached out his hand, took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of Yahweh called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, Abraham replies. And the angel of the Lord says, do not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. The angel of the Lord is Yahweh, isn't he? He speaks as Yahweh. The narrator says, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. Now, remember I told you the name of the place? Moriah. Yeah. Well, later on you're going to find out that Solomon built his temple on the site of Moriah. Yeah, the same site that Isaac was going to be sacrificed. So Abraham called the name of the place Yahweh will see, or Yahweh will see to it, or Yahweh will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of Yahweh it shall be seen, or provided, or seen to. Yahweh Jireh, the Lord will provide, or the Lord will see to it. And the angel of Yahweh called to Abraham a second time from heaven. By myself I have sworn, declares Yahweh, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will bless you, and I will surely multiply your seed. Ooh, do you remember this? He's saying it again. I will bless you. I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, as the sand that is on the seashore. Haven't you heard this before? And your seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because what is going to come from his seed? The Messiah, because you have obeyed my voice. Now, right here, we have the climax. Pa-boom! And then we have something that seems anticlimactic, but it isn't. It's the real climax. Because remember, he has just promised to bless him and give him seed, hasn't he? And what we have next is a genealogy. What does the genealogy have to do with the story of Abraham offering up Isaac? Well, a lot. You will see that God is already letting Abraham know something very important. Let's read it. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. Now, after these things it was told to Abraham, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Now you remember Terah has Abraham, Nahor, Haran. And this is that Nahor, son of Terah. But Haran has 3 children, and one of them is Milcah. So Milcah is the granddaughter of Terah, and she marries her uncle Nahor. In those days, you could marry your half-sister, you could marry your cousin, you could marry a nephew or a niece. And so, remember, in our family tree of Terah, that Nahor is Abraham's brother, and he marries Milcah, Nahor's niece. And so they have children, it says. Let's read them in verse 21. Uz, his firstborn. Buz, his brother. Kemuel, the father of Aram. So we have included here a grandson. Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Some of you know Bethuel. Remember? He's the father of, well, let's go on. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Reumah, bore Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah. Okay, in order to really see this as it is, we're going to look at it again. Now, after these events, it was told to Abraham, saying, here Milcah too, that's the next page, by the way. Here Milcah too has borne sons to Nahor, your brother. Uz, his firstborn, and Buz, his brother, Kemuel, father of Aram. Now we have Aram, who's the grandson of Nahor, and Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Now Bethuel begat Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Well, we have more than 8 if we were to count them. But he says 8. Why? Because 2 of them are grandchildren. Now, let's look down here at the bottom. We have Milcah and Nahor. They're both from Terah. Milcah, granddaughter of Terah. Nahor, son of Terah. And they have 8 children. Uz, Buz, Kemuel, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, Bethuel. But only 2 of them have grandchildren named. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the sons had no children. You know they all had children, or at least most of them, or some of them. But they're just not named. Why not? Because we need a certain number of names. Now, if he has 8 children, Nahor has 8 children. He needs how many more to make 10? Why, he needs to put in a grandson, and he needs to put in another grandchild to make it what? 10. And who's the 10th one named? Rebekah, because she is important. Much of the story is going to be about Isaac and Rebekah. Now we're given this genealogy to tie them all in together to Terah. Remember, the foundation of the Israelite nation is all from Terah, who's of the seed line of Adam and the seed line of the future Messiah. But there are two women named here. How do we know it's Rebecca who's important? Now, I know you know the rest of the story, but right now, you don't know. Is it Rebecca or is it Ma'akah? Ma'akah is from the concubine. We know it's Ma'akah because that's a female name in Hebrew. What's the difference between Reumah's children and Milcah's children? Well, let's see what the author does in order to highlight Milcah's children by Nahor. Look what it says in the first line. Here, Milcah too has borne sons to Nahor, your brother. Look at the last line about Milcah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Same wording as the top line. So we have bookends around it, which always in the Hebrew mind highlights, but we have no bookends in the second one, do we? Not only that, but we have only 1, 2, 3, 4 names in the concubine's line, and we have 10 names in this line. And you know, the 10th one is the way of showing who's in the genealogy of the Messiah. 10 names. Not only that, but Rebecca is the 10th name given. She is the one that God is choosing. Okay, so now we know the importance of, again, of a woman. It's her line that is given. Not only that, but it says, here Milcah too has borne sons to Nahor. It was important that Milcah was the wife, was chosen, because she comes from Terah. So Milcah, Nahor, and Rebecca all come from Terah. But Reumah doesn't come from Terah. She was not in his family tree line. So now we know why it's Rebecca who's important. And then remember, Isaac was the 10th one in Terah's line. We had to wait 10 chapters to find that Isaac was finally born to Sarah and to Abraham, and he was a 10. And what is Rebecca? A 10. So a 10 marries a 10. It all comes circling around to the very beginning, doesn't it? It's so interesting. I love the way the Holy Spirit gives us His Word. It's filled with all kinds of intricacies and fun things to do and fun things to learn about. I just think that's really funny. Isaac marries a 10 because Isaac is a 10. Now, the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah does not happen for 2 more chapters. He gives us this information as Abraham had gotten it, and it starts going around in Abraham's brain. There must be from Nahor and Milcah someone who can marry Isaac and produce the seed that God said. So let's read the beginning, the introduction to that story, okay? And it's in Genesis 24, and I want you to find land, seed, blessing, because whenever it's named, it's important. Now, Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and Yahweh had blessed, blessed Abraham in all things. So there we have the blessing. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by Yahweh, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites." The Israelites were never to intermarry with the Canaanites. Of course, unless a Canaanite came to the one true God, Yahweh, and acknowledged him as the one true God, among whom I dwell. But will you, my servant, but you will go to my country and to my kindred. Where are his kindred? Remember, Haran. They had stopped at Haran and settled there, dwelt there, and Abraham had to leave them. So he's going back because he knows he needs someone from Terah's seed line. But will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, "Perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land," because he knew the story. The others were unwilling to go with Abraham and come to the land, so Abraham just left. "Must I," the servant asked Abraham, "must I then take your son back to Haran, the land from which you came?" Abraham said to him, "See to it that you do not take my son back there." No, don't want him to go back there. I don't want him to get waylaid. I don't want them to say, we have him here. We're going to keep him in order so that we can keep our daughter. Yahweh, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, who spoke to me and swore to me, what did God swear? To your seed, here's seed, we had blessing, now seed, and I will give this land, the third thing. He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning the matter. Isaac must marry someone from Terah's line, which is why we are given Rebekah's genealogy 2 chapters earlier. Now, I don't know if you read it or not, but I'm going to read it. I took the story of the servant going to Haran in order to get the wife for Isaac, and I put it into my story. And I did this so that you could see what the result of this is. You could know that yes, Isaac gets his wife, but you're going to find something different here because there's going to be a word repeated in this story. So, once upon a camel. I want you to watch for the word camel and circle it because we're going to learn about different people in the story through the use of the repeated word camel. Camels don't usually speak, but in the story of the search for a wife for Isaac, they do. They whisper in our ear the local gossip about each of the main characters. We need to listen very carefully to the camels, or we may miss significant information about Abraham, Rebekah, and Laban, the characters in Genesis 24. Camel is the second most repeated noun in the chapter, signifying its importance. The first is Yahweh. Yet the camels do not appear to be noteworthy. That is why we must read the story using the first key to a dynamic Bible study, diligently seeking the repeated terms. This activity helps us focus on the author's main points. So what could possibly be noteworthy about a camel? Abraham has determined that it is time for his 40-year-old son, Isaac, to have a wife. We will find out later he's 20 years older than his wife. He commissions his servant to go to my country, to my relatives, and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant will carry a variety of precious items, enough to impress any future father-in-law. Most importantly, he will transport 10 camels from all the camels of his master. Domesticated camels were very rare at the time of Abraham. They were the Rolls Royces of the ancient world. Thus, Abraham has over 10 Rolls Royces in his garage. The camels are whispering to us, Abraham is filthy rich and well able to provide for a daughter-in-law. Arriving at a well near the home of Abraham's family at the time when women go out to draw water, the servant prays for a wife for his master's son. He intends to locate a girl who is as cordial a host as his master Abraham was to the Lord when the Lord visited Abraham in Genesis 18. Not only does his prayer require that she offer him a drink, but she is to provide water for 10 thirsty camels, a mammoth feat. Thirsty camels drink approximately 10 gallons each. The math tells us that she would have to traverse from well to trough 100 times. A beautiful girl, a virgin, arrives promptly. In reply to his request of the water, she says, "Drink, my lord," and adds, "I will draw also for your camels." Then she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw for all his camels. Again, the camels whisper to us, this girl is as hospitable as Abraham, who also ran to provide bread cakes and a choice calf to be prepared for Yahweh in Genesis 18. Only when the camels had finished drinking does the servant present the gifts of jewelry from Abraham to the maiden and inquires, "Whose daughter are you?" His prayer is totally realized as she reveals her pedigree. She is of Abraham's family. He responds, "Blessed be the Lord who has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brother." Only one question remains. Would she be willing, as Abraham had, to leave all in order to go to an unknown land? The third time the camels speak is when we are introduced to Laban, brother of Rebekah. Rebekah is running again. She ran and told her mother's household about these things. But it is Laban, her brother, who after he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's hand, went out to meet the man. Laban sees, again, something that captures his attention. It is the servant standing by the camels at the spring. He sees the servant and the camels. Laban declares to the servant that he has already prepared the house and a place for the camels. It is not until Laban had first unloaded the camels and gave straw and feed to the camels that he supplies water to wash the feet of the travelers. Where's his attention? The camels whisper, Laban is material-minded. Don't trust him. Camels have given us the lowdown on three characters. Abraham is rich enough to assure his family that his son can provide well for his future wife. Rebekah is an admirable hostess. Laban appears materialistic, and hence we are not surprised when years later he deceives Rebekah's son, Jacob, by switching brides and wrangling Jacob out of his rightful earnings. In the final scene with the camel, it is unmistakably obvious that Rebekah continues to be a replica of Abraham. Rebekah arose with her maids, and they mounted the camels and followed Abraham's servant to an expectant Isaac. She would go upon a camel, leaving family and home behind, as Abraham had left his country, his relatives, and his father's house to go to a land God would show him. The last whisper from the camels is, her Abraham-like faith makes her the right choice for Abraham's son. Perhaps one day the camels would also kneel alongside Rebekah's two sons, Esau and Jacob, and whisper their tale, once upon a camel. I hope you enjoyed that. God bless you.